Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast in association with eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday the 1st of August, and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson. So, an absolutely mega headline-busting show this week. It's episode 368, but...
not the most optimistic of weeks of headlines, is it? In many ways, some is, some are. Let's not kid ourselves. There is some positivity in here, but it's been a bit of a week of negatives, I think.
It has, yeah, and I did find myself in the position of selecting stories not to run because, as I say, so much has happened this week since we were last on last weekend. So a lot to cover, and as you say, probably more downbeat stories than upbeat ones. But we've got a nice round off story at the end of the show, which is definitely upbeat.
We have, and I think it's interesting. Some of the, particularly one of the headlines that we'll talk about this week, ties in with some previous interviews that we've had on the podcast as well. So it's definitely worth tuning back into some of the previous interviews, isn't it? Particularly on the story of the week.
It is, yes, and we will have hopefully an interview next week. So stay tuned for that. We'll let you know on social media when that goes out, probably middle of next week. But
we do have to be careful these days.
We want to record it first, don't we?
Yes, we need to be careful promoting things these days because days are changing very quickly at the minute in our sector, aren't they? And things are, ever changing. So we'll keep an eye on that. But we have got some, like I say, some big headlines, like you say, Curtis. I mean, had to be fairly selective because you just realise that since last Saturday's recording, where do you end up? I mean, you see something on the Monday and it's all news by the Wednesday, isn't it? So there's so much happening this week. But do you want to run through some of the headlines that we're going to talk about this week?
Yeah, we do have a story of the week, although, as I say, there's been plenty of competition. And it is Mitsubishi pulling out of the new car market across Europe, which includes the UK. And within that, we've got a personal update from UK MD Rob Lindley, who got in touch with us after the announcement, so we'll include that. Elsewhere this week, we've got job losses and site closures at Pendragon, and also job losses at Imperial Cars supermarkets, and that's just 2 weeks after the Kazoo acquisition that we covered on the show. The FCA has confirmed the ban on car dealers' discretionary motor finance commissions. We've got strong demand at online auctions, restructuring at Inchcape following first half losses. We've got the SMMT reforecast for the new car market. And as we hinted at earlier, we'll close off with an upbeat story about it's a top 10, isn't it? It's the return of the top 10. So it's the top 10 highest conversion rates for OEMs in the first half of 2020.
So, like I say, the big story of the week is obviously, as you say there, Curtis, Mitsubishi UK car dealers informed of brand's unexpected market withdrawal. And the story we're covering is on AM Online. And I think this has come as a shock, not just to us, but as to the dealer network and particularly with, as you mentioned there, with Rob Lindley on the decision there that, as you say, that they will no longer be supplying new cars following any that have already on the way to the UK and being obviously identified for the UK in the future. And like I say, this has left a lot of questions, a lot of conversations, and as we know, there's been a lot of investment in the recent 12, 18 months, particularly in some areas, in some of the dealerships across the franchise network, because it was on the up. It was increasing its market share and had some fantastic operators within that franchise.
Yeah, and this is on the back of it's really on the back of group forecast for the full year. So this is in Japan, where it was forecast that the company was going to lose $1.33 billion for the current financial year, which would have been its biggest loss in 18 years and follows heavy loss last year. So what Mitsubishi have said is that they are going to be focusing on the Southeast Asian market and China in particular, so that they're really coming out of Europe because of that, because they want to go back to their area of strength and rebuild that. But of course that has come as a bolt out of the blue for Mitsubishi dealers and indeed the importer, the Colt Car Company in the UK.
Yeah, and I mean, it was, we interviewed Rob Lindley recently on the podcast, and as you say, you've got a statement that Rob's kindly provided. But obviously earlier in the year, they were talking obviously about the growth and the new investment, the CI investment into the franchise, and expecting to be reaching 50,000 UK sales by the end of 2022. We know that there was the alliance partnership with Renault and Nissan that was obviously announced in terms of the global efforts to cut costs and improve efficiencies across the manufacturing operations. So everything seemed to be going in the right direction from a UK perspective for definite, wasn't it? But it's a bull out of the blue with this one.
Yes, and because we did ask him about how Mitsubishi stood in terms of stock for new cars, and they'd actually brought forward their ordering process, fortunately, before the pandemic hit, because they were expecting a hiccup over Brexit. Remember Brexit? So, their stocks looked very good. Yeah, when we spoke to Rob 2 weeks ago. So Mitsubishi dealers in the UK will still have that supply coming through because, that's presumably in the country now, which is a good position to be. But as you say, Rob did drop me a line, and he says, I'll read extracts from it, but he says, we at the Colt Car Company were surprised and disappointed at Mitsubishi Motors' announcement on Monday that it won't be introducing any new vehicles into the European market. He goes on to say, I think it is important to reassure your listeners that the Colt Car Company will continue to order and to sell the existing range of Mitsubishi products, and we will fully support our dealer network in terms of service, repair, warranty, recalls, parts and accessories well into the future. And he also goes on to talk about possible future scenarios. So he says, as an independent distributor, we have considerable experience and expertise, so we now need to look at options to leverage our capabilities and strengths as a business and explore opportunities with new brands, especially in the EV space. We were already having exploratory discussions, and clearly now we will double down on that effort. So hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel there, because if those conversations were already happening, as Rob says, they'll now be accelerated.
Yeah, and I think the key with this, there's been previous experience a couple of times in the years of the sector that the key with this is obviously that survival in the meantime, and there are operators that will be able to survive with Mitsubishi as a specialist after sales operation, be able to survive for the next sort of 12 months, 18 months, as long as those current vehicles are available. I think, we know that there are certain models within the lineup that are very popular, particularly in that pickup sector. The after sales market for Mitsubishi is a very profitable one for the dealer network. And there's talks of obviously some of those Chinese brands coming over to the UK that could replace those operations, and I think the key with this is how quickly those come and be able to be offered as an alternative. How much reliance there is from some of the dealers. Some of them are soulless Mitsubishi operators. We've got people like Nathan Tomlinson that we had on the podcast as well as an interviewer, and he's popular. In terms of, he's a very good operator, and I'm sure there'll be many manufacturers that will be knocking on his door to try and get him to take their franchise on in his territory. I think he was getting a 10% penetration in his territory. Yeah. So fantastic operator. operator, whereas some others, they may not have that opportunity, and it's going to be a positive for some, opportunity for some, and sort of negative for some others, unfortunately. But again, we'll keep a close eye on it as to what happens and the moves from there. But I say it's great to have Rob on the podcast, and obviously for him to kind of share that update as well, because I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions being asked from the dealer network at the minute.
Yeah, and so moving on, next story is from Motor Trader, and the headline is Pendragon to make 1,800 staff redundant and close 15 dealerships. So this was a stock exchange announcement that Pendragon made during the week, and it confirmed that 15 sites will be closed as a result of a review that it's carried out. So 7 of those are freehold, 8 are leasehold, and it goes on to say that predominantly the closures are loss-making sites, and they say and therefore no longer expected to be viable. So, but the news gets worse, because it says a total of approximately 400 redundancies that are expected from these locations. But as a result of a restructuring that it's also implementing, is saying the proposed changes to its operating model are expected to result in approximately 1,400 redundancies. So that is a grand total of 1,800 job losses there.
Yeah, and it's there is across their dealer network, the service network, and head office, because they have obviously got a very strong workforce within their head office, so it's spread very much across the business, and there hasn't been an announcement yet in terms of which sites will close. I'm sure that lots of conversations are currently taking place, and Bill, who we've mentioned before on the podcast, will be looking at it very closely as to what he does and when he does it. So, I mean, best of luck to anybody involved with those conversations in Pendragon. And it kind of coincides with the other sort of announcement this week, which came out of Inchcape PLC, and they're a global car operator, and they announced a reduction of their sort of global workforce, and as part of the group to overhaul after a company fell to 188 million pre-tax profit for the first half of the year. So again, Inchcape struggling in that first half of the year across the UK and the global market for those guys. So I think a lot of this is starting to come out of the woodwork now, isn't it, as the furlough becomes sort of towards the end and the final stages, and full months start to kick in.
Yeah, you're right. We will be hearing more as we head towards the ending of the furlough period in October. So the next headline is from Car Dealer, and the headline is just 2 weeks after Cazoo acquired Imperial Car Supermarkets, some 300 staff at risk of losing their jobs. So we were just talking about this a fortnight ago. So this was Cazoo acquiring the Imperial Car Supermarket chain, and now some of the details are coming out. And the Car Dealer story, I think it's pretty much based on a source getting in touch with Car Dealer and revealing some of the plans there. So I'm not sure how much of this has actually been confirmed, but I guess there is an inevitability about this, because we were talking 2 weeks ago about how this was the shift from clicks to bricks, but obviously Cazoo, being a digital player, is taking a lot of its digital practices into this physical world. So the source hints at sales, a change in the way sales are handled, and maybe going more centrally rather than being handled at branch level. Yeah,
and I think we've got if heart goes out to anybody involved with the redundancies. It's never good to see any redundancies in any market, and as times as they are at the minute, it's not great to see. We need to remember it's probably connected with some of the Inchcape previous, and the Pendragon and others that we've discussed as well. There's a lot of stuff coming out here that's about efficiencies as well. You can see that within potentially the announcement there from Kazoo and Imperial. That's alignment of efficiencies that they'll have in their sort of digital click operation, and how they can merge those into their physical operation, such as Imperial Cars at the minute. They talk about, obviously, those, the face-to-face sales roles into favour of online meetings with customers. So you can see where that e-commerce digital proposition is now starting to play into it. With that last story as well, there's lots of conversations taking place across the franchise dealer network specifically around this, but that efficiency of job roles, job functions across the car market, that over the years there's been sort of requirements and standards imposed on the dealers from the manufacturers, whether that's front of house meet and greet staff to you have somebody employed to load the vehicles onto the digital platform, etc., etc. And there's a lot of, resource transference onto the dealer network that, I think as we're in this predicament with the COVID-19, and we saw it back in the sort of 2007, 2008 recession, that, there's a lot of pushback now from the dealer network that actually, do we need that person? Do we need that job role? Do we need to be valeting every single car that comes into the workshop for a small warranty repair or an intermediate service? Do we need to give it a full valet, or actually should that be a chargeable? Do we need to be doing all this? And there's lots of them conversations taking place, and I know that a lot of the senior execs across the larger groups are pushing back at the minute with some of those standards that have been imposed, either from a European perspective or just purely a franchise OEM perspective. And I think we're going to see a little bit of that. There's obviously an element of furloughing, an element of cost, and an element of COVID-19 impact, but I think some of it will also be about streamlining the businesses in these times of need, and being able to push back on certain functions that aren't necessary to move that business forward. So it's a shame, as we say, but I'm sure we'll see a lot more from the Kazoo and the Imperial alignment now, won't we, going forward? Because there's obviously a reason that they acquired Imperial, and I'm sure that we've not seen it all yet.
Yeah, and next headline is from AM Online, and it's FCA confirms ban on car dealers' discretionary motor finance commission models. So we were kind of expecting this, because the review's been going on by the FCA for some time, but it's actually confirmed that the ban will come into place from January 28th next year. So that there is a bit of time to get things in order for that. But I guess the headline figure from the FCA is that they say that by removing the discretionary commission model, customers potentially stand to save £165 million per year, and it does eliminate what the FCA points out as being a conflict of interest there.
Yeah, and I suppose the positive thing with this, and I know that the FDA have done quite a bit of work on it with others, but it's the deferment of it, I think, is the key with this one. I think everybody knew it was coming. It was, it's been announced that it was coming, but I think at the minute it's one of those things that you could just do without, in terms of that changes to processes within the market. And I think that deferment of implementation, and the fact that it is now happening, we know that it's happening, then at least then the market can then start to work towards that date, can't they, for what they need to do in the processes they need to have in place for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely right, because it could have been brought in this year, so that is welcome news there. Exactly. So you're listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast in association with eBay Motors Group, the only weekly podcast serving the car retailing sector, and available by subscribing on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Deezer, and SoundCloud. So the next story is over with Motor Trader, and the headline is actually from myself. Sorry, I'm talking about your story. It's one of yours. It's one of mine. Strong performance at online auctions driven by pent-up demand. And I think this kind of,
it adds to other things that we've been talking about in general over recent weeks. But we at the Mannheimer, obviously, they're in the online auction space at the minute. Currently, since the restrictions were lifted and business got back to some kind of normality. I think what is interesting when we look at the stats and the performance for the same period from the 1st of June to the 27th of July, so looking at that same period last year, the majority of the stats are up. I mean, first time conversions are up, compared to year on year by 6.7%. The CAP performance, albeit, CAP have announced their figures this week, and I think if I'm from memory, it's 0.4% up at 3 year 60. So again, year to date from a CAP HPI perspective, the market is now level from a year to date perspective, and I think that's going to be an interesting one now as the year progresses with the values there having a level market compared to, I think, same point last year. I think we were down 11 or 12% at this same point last year. But performance is well. People seem to be positive and very strong appetite in that digital auction space. It's quite interesting, really, because some of the guys from the auctions are talking about sales where they've got 200 and 300 people online at any one time, online through a simulcast auction. And one of the comments one of the auctioneers made is actually where you might have two friends in a hall bidding, on a vehicle, but actually one of them says, "Oh, you can have that one," or "You can have this one." Actually, in the online space, they're just bidding against each other because they're just bidding to buy.
So the gloves are off.
So the gloves are off in many ways. So yeah, it's quite an interesting point, that, and I'm sure some people listening to the podcast will agree, and some will certainly disagree with that one, saying, "Oh, we don't let anybody else." But I have seen it over the years where you've got mates that are saying, "Well, that's better if you have that one, I'll have the next one," kind of thing. Whereas in the online space, they are just a bidder online. So it's quite an interesting one.
Yeah, and I guess it's interesting that also auction halls were allowed to reopen from the 15th of June, but I was doing a bit of research this week, and I can't find any auction halls that are open for physical auctions at the moment, unless you know otherwise. But there are some being advertised for August, so maybe we'll start to see more physical activity. We'll see. I
mean, it is under constant review, but I mean, there's a collection and delivery process in place for both the vendors and buyers. There are vendors where they want to be physical at the sale, albeit in the online space, so they want to be there to watch the auction take place, because essentially the auctioneer is there on a rostrum controlling those cars coming through in the digital space. But I think one thing is we've got to be very careful. There's a lot of localised lockdowns starting to happen. We know there's the risk of the second phase coming out, being discussed at the minute. It's a slightly different area. When you've got a sale, I mean, you've got a sale where you've got 500-600 cars going through, or commercial vehicles, and you've got up to 200-300 people on site that don't turn up by appointment. All are wanting to look in the cars, move the cars, start the cars, look in the boot. It's a slightly different process to be able to operate a social distancing and sanitisation is the challenge with it. And do you open up an auction for a select number of customers, but then what do you do with the ones that haven't been selected, and where do you draw the line on people turning up? So it's a slightly complicated process to manage. But I think at the minute, the demand is there. Those that are operating in the online space are used to it. There's those that operated in it pre-COVID-19. There's those that have moved into it post-COVID-19. So again, the strong performance and the systems are there in place, and some good work being done by everybody involved, in fairness, both from an auctions perspective and a buyers and vendors perspective.
Yeah. Now, next headline is from AM Online, and it's UK's 2020 new car sales forecast downgraded again by SMMT. And this was an exclusive published by AM late in the week. So I don't know if they got hold of the figures before the SMMT released them, but well done on reporting them. But this is the latest quarterly forecast from the SMMT, and it now predicts that 1.6 million new cars will be registered over the course of 2020, and that's actually 84,000 fewer cars than it was forecasting as recently as April. So it is showing how things are moving on now, and they base these forecasts on surveys from car makers, and the forecast reveals a 700,000 unit hole in new car supply and demand, which is 30% down year on year.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a difficult one. I think currently, the performance for July in early figures that I've had sight of is very positive. I mean, we were talking about it pre the recording, and with 2 days to go, and there'll be a lot of activities, we know, probably in the final 2 days, as always.
What are you inferring?
No, nothing at all, nothing at all. But there will be activity taking place. But I think last time I saw the figures, 2 days to go, we were about 18 to 20% up year on year for the month of June. So that's a very positive result there for the month of July. Sorry. And the reality is that I think we spoke about it on one of the podcasts that June, because everyone were referencing June, but actually June wasn't a full month in many ways, because Wales wasn't open for the full month. We know Scotland weren't open for the majority, if not all, of June. Many of the manufacturers had a majority of their staff on furlough until the 4th of July. Yeah. So it was really going to be July before we saw any real recovery. And I mean, we forecast that July would be a 20% increase on last year. So we forecast as Cox Automotive 180,000 units for the month of July. As the figures look with 2 days to go, it could exceed that. But that would then put, we forecast 24.6% down for the year, down to just short of 1.7 million new car registrations. So again, similar to what SMMT are forecasting there, but a lot of the questions at the minute are around used cars and what's going to happen in the
exactly.
Q2 and the first half of 2020, and what the impact has been on used cars, not necessarily new at the minute.
Yeah, because we'll see the Q2 used car figures in probably about 2 weeks' time. So we'll definitely report on those on the show, and we'll have the new car figures next Saturday. But whilst we're talking about the SMMT, because it's looks like it's been a busy week for them, they also released half-year figures for car LCV and engine production. Now, bearing in mind, the lockdown shut production facilities for at least 2 months. The figures are all down. So car production was down 43% to just shy of 57,000 units, but that's the lowest half-year level since 1954. LCV production was down 25% in the 6 months, and engine production was also down. That was down 39% to 815,000 units.
Yeah, and on the back of that, there's been a little bit of news sort of come out about the on the back of the production drops, but around they've named it as the crisis in the industry, and that's on of all places Yahoo Finance, which I think is a first for the podcast actually, that we are talking about this one. But they've talked about that factories made just over 380,000 cars, which was 285,000 fewer than the same period of last year. So production, as you say, they're down sort of circa 50% in June, but they're talking about that collapse in production has led to job crisis in the industry, with at least 11,349 roles lost as far as this year, with car manufacturers like Ford, Bentley, Jaguar, Land Rover, McLaren, Aston Martin, and Renault, as we know, in the market there. So again, that's the SMMT talking about the crisis and the impact on not just obviously the production, but actually the knock-on effect on jobs within that sector as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the final story this week comes from Motor Trader. I won't read out the headline just yet because it will spoil the story, but this is the conversion rate story that we flagged up at the beginning. So it's research done by Honcho, and what they've looked at are the Google searches for new cars, and they've compared searches with registrations to produce a top 10, so the top 10 converters. So in reverse order, number 10 was Mercedes at 1.45%. Number 9, Ford at 1.47. Number 8, Seat, 1.55. Number 7 is Vauxhall at 1.72. Number 6, Kia, 1.74. Number 5, we're in the top 5, Skoda at 1.78. Number 4, Toyota at 1.79. Number 3, straight in. Number 3 is MG, and they're on 1.86%. Number 2 is Mini at 2.2%, and the best performing brand for the first 6 months of the year in terms of conversion rates is Volkswagen at 3.1%.
I mean, it does raise the question. I mean, how many times we were talking around the sort of Dieselgate and the impact on VW through Dieselgate, and this distant memory now, isn't it? I think in fairness to that,
is.
I mean, it's there was questions at the time as how they will survive and how will they get through this and everything else. I mean, what is it now? 6 years, 7 years, probably the Dieselgate has probably been going on, if not longer. I think that's probably as long as the hashtag has been going. Never mind the saga itself.
Yeah, and Volkswagen as a brand has emerged from it. If anything, it's stronger now than it was then. So, it's a remarkable turnaround, and it's the sort of thing that will be taught in sort of marketing schools in years to come. What happens to a brand when it appears to be toxic? It's been found to do something that it shouldn't have been doing, but bounces back. It really is extraordinary. And I should have added that this is based on 1.9 million Google searches over the course of that period. So some hefty traffic there.
Yeah, no, exactly. And as you say about VAG there, and we're talking about the new car performances, and Audi 41% up year on year in the month of July there. VW 3% up in the month of July there. So far we're still 2 days to go, so again, strong performance there. I mean, 41% up from a Audi perspective, slightly ahead of where BMW are from a year on year. So some strong operators there. I think the one that is a negative, unfortunately, and that kind of aligns with some of the challenges that they've got at the minute, is Vauxhall, with what's going on with the PSA merger and everything else along that Vauxhall brand. But lots to talk about. So I think there's that many headlines, isn't there? We could have a whole afternoon of talking about the market, couldn't we, on this podcast? But we have tried being selective in terms of the headlines. There's as always, we advise you go over to some of the platforms that we've mentioned. I mean, there's news coming out all the time at the minute. There's lots happening across the market, and just head over, and the details, go into some of these ones that we've briefly sort of highlighted in a little bit more detail, and we'll try and keep you up to speed as things do change with some of these stories as well, particularly around things like the Pendragon, the Inchcape, and the Kazoo and Imperial, to name a few there, that is changing, and obviously, again, thoughts are with everybody involved with any redundancies across those businesses, and again, thoughts with the Mitsubishi dealership network, because that was a shock for everybody, I think, when that was announced on Monday of this week.
Yeah, well, that is all for this week. You've been listening to the Motor Trade Radio podcast, brought to you in association with eBay Motors Group. Join Philip and I again next weekend for our review of the headlines. And as we mentioned earlier, do look out for the latest in our series of special interviews with industry leaders, which we'll be recording and posting early next week. Until next week, though, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.